Alright, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we have a lot to unpack in this video, so let's just get straight into it. So, what this does here is this picks up with two things that have happened in Marvel Comics. One is a really long time ago, and another one is relatively recently. As far as the relatively recent event goes, at the time this story was created, it's an event called the War of Kings. Now, War of Kings is a story that we've never actually covered here on Comics Explained. I'd like to. I think it's a really cool story. The overall gist of this is that you basically had the Shi'ar Empire, which was taken over by Vulcan, Gabriel Summers, the third brother of Cyclops that we didn't know about. He's just this really overpowered Omega level mutant. He conquered an entire empire, took it over, and then went to war with the Kree Empire. Now, by that point in time, the Inhumans from Earth had actually traveled to the Kree Empire and they had taken it over. So in effect, the War of Kings was a war between Black Bolt and Vulcan. And what this did is it actually led to a giant bomb that was detonated. And when that happened, it basically ripped a hole in space and time, creating what was called a fissure, and that basically led to the Cancerverse. That universe was explored in a story called the Thanos Imperative, which we have covered here on Comics Explained, and that story is amazing. But the thing about this is that in the midst of all that, Black Bolt was believed to have been dead in the sense that it was believed he was caught in the explosion. What had actually happened is Black Bolt had basically been ripped away from the main Marvel universe and into the Cancerverse. He was subdued by one of the many angled ones, which is basically what Shumagorath is in Marvel Comics, except in the instance of Shumagorath, he basically broke free of the spaces between universes, which is where the many angled ones reside, and he started conquering whole realities. But the ones that took over the Cancerverse are the ones that are normally confined in the space between universes, but because of the events of the Cancerverse, which again, at the end of this video, you're welcome to check out the playlist on the Thanos Imperative storyline, they had basically taken over that universe, and that's where Black Bolt ended up at. So of course, he's able to overpower it, and then he ends up back in the main Marvel universe, where he's rescued by the Inhuman teleporting dog Lockjaw, and brought back to the Kree Empire, right? Brought back to the Inhumans themselves. The other thing that goes on here, which is a little bit bigger than this, deals with the Supreme Intelligence directly. And the idea is that the Supreme Intelligence had at one point in time come to the idea that if the Kree Empire wants to take over different races and ultimately conquer the universe, the best way to do it is to basically engineer beings that can kind of stand in as members of those races, right? So to create a Skrull who looks like a Skrull, to create a human who looks like a human, so on and so forth. But what would really go on here is they would have what was called an Inhuman gene. And the reality is they would undergo Terrigenesis, and when that happened, they would develop powers. But because they were engineered by the Kree, they would be loyal to the Kree. But in effect, what it would do is it would allow the Kree race to basically create Trojan horses in these different empires and then take them out from the inside out. And so the idea behind this is that where it was initially a grand idea, the Supreme Intelligence had a kind of vision that the Inhuman Project would lead to the destruction of the entire Kree race. And so what the Supreme Intelligence did in response to that is it ordered the Accuser Corps to destroy the entirety of the Inhuman Project and all the scientists involved with the project, and then to travel to every single world where an Inhuman was stationed and destroy that world, right? Raise the whole thing, kill everyone there to make sure that no Inhuman escapes. Ultimately, 5 different worlds survived, and that's where you end up getting the wives of Black Bolt coming from, right? They come from those secret Inhuman races that survived and basically escaped this great big huge purge. Now, beyond that, there did come a point in the Supreme Intelligence's history when it basically had a kind of vision yet again that it would ultimately be destroyed by Black Bolt of the Inhumans. But the Kree didn't know where Black Bolt was at. They didn't even know where the Inhumans were. They were just so well hidden from seemingly everybody in the universe. So in order to make sure that the Supreme Intelligence survived, what it did is it placed inside of Ronan the Accuser the Supremer Seed, so that at a future point in time, the Supreme Intelligence could be reborn in its original form. And so what's really cool here and what goes on, and this is going to be one of the more important things here, this basically leads to the return of the Inhumans on Earth as we covered it in the last video. Now, when Black Bolt shows up here, of course, he's greeted by the different wives that are being presented to him as a way to kind of unite the Inhuman cities. So this is one thing to understand. Medusa is his one true wife. Him having these other wives is more ceremonial than anything else. But what it does is it's kind of an official recognition of these different tribes of Inhumans by Black Bolt, right? So you are all now being brought under the Attilan royal family of the Inhumans by having a quote-unquote marriage to Black Bolt, right? So again, it's more of a ceremonial thing. And so what this does is it basically transitions back over to the forever city of the High Evolutionary. Now remember, this is one of the last pieces of the puzzle. We don't really know exactly what these alternate reality versions of Reed Richards are building. We just simply know they're building something. And so the thing about this is that as they're uniting all these different bits and pieces, when the Inhumans arrive back onto the scene, a giant war breaks out. Now again, this conflict, right, this war is not only among these alternate reality versions of Reed, but their forces, which of course include the Mole Man and different people like that. But it basically leads to the main Reed Richards along with the Future Foundation and the various villains that they've unified in an effort to find a way to destroy these alternate Reeds joining into the conflict as well. So this right here is basically the War of the Four Cities. This is the event that the future version of Valeria warned her younger self about, right? The War of the Four Cities will come, that you will have these alternate versions of Reed that will try to unite these different parts of the world in order to basically harness little bits of machinery or little things they need, but it'll create a massive conflict. Now, in the middle of all this, of course, you basically have Black Bolt who arrives, Black Bolt does his thing, but also you have Medusa who appears before the main Reed Richards with Lockjaw and teleports him to the Inhuman Royal City. Now, you do get this really amazing moment that goes on here where you have Dr. Doom, again, who's part of the Future Foundation, facing off against these different versions of Reed. He is able to momentarily overcome one, and it's really kind of funny because like this guy's like, oh, it's a Dr. Doom, right? Because this alternate version of Reed, remember, they would travel around the multiverse, they would capture different versions of Doom, and they would lobotomize him. So when it recognizes a Dr. Doom, it starts to ready the inhibitor collar, and of course, Doom just slaps him across the face, right? And he's like, do not speak again unless it is to answer my questions. Do you understand? It's like the most Dr. Doom thing ever. He does have this amazing moment in this story. It's gonna be absolutely awesome. But before any of that transpires, he's actually overcome by the different villains that were unified to destroy the alternate versions of Reed. Now, of course, they try to kill him with fire, and it's just this amazing moment, right? This is the moment I was talking about. It's like this amazing moment. Dr. Doom is like, fire. You try to kill me with fire. Folly, I have burned before, world be damned, Doom endures. And like literally just immersed in flame, stands up and goes to kill the other villains. And in fact, he does. He kills one of them right on the spot, right? Just kills him right there. This is one of those things where like, if you're going to betray Dr. Doom, well then my friend, you pay your money and take your chances. That's literally all it is, man. That's literally how that works. And sometimes, the slot machines do not fall in your favor, and that's literally what happens here. Now, the reality here, and really the biggest reason why the Inhumans are here in the first place, is really kind of Jonathan Hickman sort of hitting on things behind the scenes in the sense that with the Illuminati and all of that, that Black Bolt and those guys are basically allies, specifically Black Bolt is more of a close ally to Reed Richards. So it's really showing up here to help destroy the multiversal version of Reed Richards, right? These different versions of Reed from other realities. But one of the things to know, and what's really interesting here, is the desire of Reed Richards himself and even Dr. Doom is to at least take one of these guys prisoner, because the intention is that by doing so, they'll be able to gain valuable information. What are they building? Why are they doing this, right? What's this massive threat that they're talking about that they keep having to face off against? But the idea of the Inhumans is to annihilate these guys, right? Destroy them, be done with it. It's just one of those hardened aspects and one of the different elements between the Inhumans and anybody else. The Inhumans don't usually take prisoners. Instead, the Inhumans basically destroy those that either try to bring them harm or are a credible threat, right? They just don't really take prisoners, they just annihilate everybody. And so what this does is it leads to two versions of these Reeds being captured by the Inhumans themselves. Now, those two Reeds will become incredibly important over the course of this video. The third one actually ends up escaping, but in fact, its escape is noticed by Dr. Doom, who travels in to find that version of Reed, only to find himself overcome by Reed. And in fact, it's really intriguing here because this version of Reed literally says, do you have any idea how many times I've fought you in different universes? How many other yous I've defeated single-handedly, right? Like, while your origin and the role you play in different universes is relatively unique from one universe to the next, your mad quest for power is always the same. Your level of power is for the most part consistent. If I can defeat you there, I can defeat you here. And he literally starts doing dances, right? Just playing games around Dr. Doom, all the way to the point that he manages to slap one of the inhibitor collars on Doom himself. Now again, we saw from like the Council of Reed stories, the inhibitor collars are used to lobotomize Doom, right? To literally destroy higher brain function and reduce him to a base fate. There's no real way to restore someone on after the collar's done its job and destroyed higher brain function. There's no way to bring them back. And so literally he tells Doom that, right? Like, you know exactly how these collars work. You've been told how these collars work, right? Like Reed Richards of this universe, of this Earth, he explained it to you. And when Doom's like, yes, then the response to this version of Reed is, then you will do exactly what I tell you to. Otherwise, I will activate this collar, I will destroy your higher brain function, and you'll spend the rest of your days drinking your food through a straw. Take me to Latveria. And so what this does is it basically leads to what's in effect the conclusion of this battle, right? It's really more of a battle as opposed to like a giant war. But at the end of the day, it all kind of comes to a conclusion, right? It all basically winds down and ends. The Ascension engine is basically deactivated or kind of shut down to a degree. And so the result of this is that Spider-Man and Nathaniel Richards and Reed Richards are basically brought before what's called the Door of Eldrac, right? Basically belonging to the Inhumans. This guy was a human at one point in time. When he went to the Terrigen Mist, he just turned into a giant door. I know it's weird, right? Like, it's just one of those wonky things, just go with it. But the idea is that the door only ever is based on one of two things, either need or desire. And which one that is depends on what universe you're in. In this reality, the Door of Eldrac focuses on desire. And so the reality is that once Reed and Nathaniel and Peter Parker basically pass through the door will take them to where they desire to be most, even if they don't even realize they desire to be there, right? If it's like a subconscious desire, the one that is the most significant, that's where the door will take them. Now, the funny thing about this is the questions asked by Peter, can the door take you through time? If what Peter desires most is to go back and save the life of Uncle Ben, will the door send him there? None of them really know. The only way to find out is to walk through the door, which is exactly what they do. Now again, while this is taking place, there are a couple things going on in the background that we haven't quite covered yet, and we'll cover them here. That when Black Bolt had taken over the Kree Empire, he is in effect the Emperor, right? He's the king, he's the ruler, the top guy. But when he left, what he did is he put Ronan the Accuser in charge as kind of a steward, a person keeping an eye on the kingdom while Black Bolt is away. And so what it did is it put Ronan in a position where those individuals who were still loyal to the Kree heritage or the Kree Empire and believe that the Inhumans are unjust rulers, they actually appeal to Ronan and they basically say, you should be the one running the kingdom right now. You should be the one running the show, not the Inhumans. The Inhumans have vacated their position. This leaves the entirety of the Kree kingdom open for you. Will you take it or will you leave it? And ultimately, Ronan the Accuser speaks directly with Crystal of the Inhumans. Now, Crystal of the Inhumans was always kind of a bit of an outlier. Like, she was part of the Inhuman royal family, but she was more of like a person who orbited the family as opposed to a tried and true member. I mean, she was, but she wasn't. She had a thing going on with like Quicksilver for a little while, and in fact, Crystal and Quicksilver have a daughter, which is kind of cool. But the idea behind Crystal being here is that in order to solidify the rule of the Inhumans over the Kree, that a marriage was arranged between Crystal and Ronan. Now, the thing about this is that Ronan was very much in love with Crystal, but the thing about Crystal is she saw the marriage as more of a political game than anything else, which of course was sort of distraught Ronan, because in reality, it just kind of felt like she wasn't actually into it for him. She was into it for the politics. Over time, she genuinely has developed a love for Ronan the Accuser, but the thing about this is that with him talking to her, her response is, they're right? Like, the Inhumans have vacated their throne, even if they don't know it. If they wanted to stay in charge of the Kree Empire, they should have stayed with the Kree Empire. The reality is that you are the rightful ruler of the Kree race because you're their accuser, right? You're the top person outside of the Inhumans. Beyond them, you're the number one dog. If you want the kingdom, take the kingdom. And that's literally what Ronan the Accuser does. At that point, he starts creating battle formations. He organizes the Armada with the intention of traveling to Earth and eradicating not just the Inhumans, but the entirety of the Earth's population. But the other thing that goes on here is that when Nathaniel Richards passed through the portal, he ended up in Latveria, where you had that alternate version of Reed and Dr. Doom. This is where he basically had to be, right? This is where he needed to be. And the thing about this is that it's kind of a funny situation, because this alternate version of Reed asked Nathaniel, is the Great Hunt still ongoing? And the response of Nathaniel is, no, I won the Great Hunt, right? I came out on top. Now, the thing about this, and we'll find out more about the Great Hunt in a future story, what's so ironic about this is that this version of Reed, the reason why these guys, these alternate Reeds, even created and joined the Council of Reeds in the first place, the reason why they were able to abandon their own families is because their fathers abandoned them, right? The sins of the father become the sins of the son. And so for the most part, the Great Hunt was literally this multiversal hunt among all these different versions of Nathaniel. And in fact, we'll talk more about that because this actually invokes the entire role of like Immortus, King the Conqueror, all that stuff, right? It's really, really cool how it works. But again, with this version of Nathaniel saying he'd come out on top, the response of this version of Reed is, well, then there's only one thing left to do, right? Like his intention is to basically destroy Nathaniel because his belief is that Nathaniel is here for Dr. Doom, when in reality, Nathaniel says, like, you know, sometimes it amazes me, Reed. It seems like as smart and as intelligent as you are in every universe, you just don't have the ability to read the room, right? I'm not here for Dr. Doom. I'm here because you need me. And that's what's so cool, right? That's what's so interesting. Of course, Peter Parker had basically been teleported to Ben Grimm and told Ben Grimm, stop sulking over the fact that Dr. Doom joined the Fantastic Four. It's time for you to go home, man. Like, go back to the Fantastic Four team. Go join them. Now, from here, we jump back to Ronan the Accuser, and what's really interesting is, again, Ronan the Accuser is on a quest to basically restore the Kree Empire back to the way it was before, and to lead a campaign against Earth. But in order to do that, he has to restore the Supreme Intelligence. This is where those two Reeds and the Supremacy that I told you about would become incredibly important, because what happens is that when the Kree Armada shows up to Earth and to the Inhuman Royal City, or really to Attilan itself, they're cloaked. They're undetected. No one knows they're there. They send a kind of stealth vessel to the Inhuman City itself, and they capture these two versions of Reed. And what Ronan does is he literally puts them on trial and judges against them, right? He's like, as the accuser, I accuse you of hubris on the most extreme level, on a multiversal level. You have put your wants and desires above all beings in the multiverse. And as mortal men, it's not your role to do that. I judge you and I find you guilty. Now, most people that I judge would be annihilated. They would be destroyed, and that would be the end of it. The truth is that your sacrifice will have some measure of meaning. You will continue to live on. And what Ronan does is he releases the Supremacy, which attaches itself to both versions of Reed and then absorbs them into its own consciousness and restores the Supreme Intelligence. It's kind of gruesome. When that happens, the Supreme Intelligence is filled in on various things by Ronan the Accuser, and it realizes, with us being here on Earth, the Inhumans, right? Black Bolt is the one that I dreamt of at some previous point in time. Black Bolt and the Inhumans have to die. Everybody on Earth needs to be eradicated. Now, the funny thing about this, and this is what's so interesting here, is Jonathan Hickman kind of teasing the events of like Inhumanity and all that kind of stuff. Because while the Fantastic Four came before the events of Jonathan Hickman's Avengers: The New Avengers, what we know is that during that story, the Inhuman royal family were not the only Inhumans on Earth, that there were various individuals walking around the world who possessed the Inhuman gene. They simply hadn't been exposed to the Terrigen Mist, and they just didn't know it. And so this is him kind of hitting at this idea. There's a lot more Inhumans roaming around Earth than we were initially led to believe. And that's why the Supreme Intelligence makes the decision, everybody's got to go, right? Like they all got to die. And that's basically the end of it. And so with this armada basically being formed, right, being, you know, kind of coming together, what we find out is that when Ben Grimm was on his way back to Earth, he basically reached out to the X-Men, the Avengers, and the Mighty Avengers. He reached out to the entirety of the superhero landscape, and it basically brought them to Reed Richards, and then Reed, of course, apologized to everybody and is saying, look, with everything that was going on with these different alternate reality versions of myself and so on and so forth, I should have reached out to all of you first. I should have come to all of you first, right? We have fought side by side against a multitude of threats, and while the different threats that we face, depending on their severity, may or may not involve the Avengers or the X-Men or the Fantastic Four, the reality is that this does. It was foolish of me to believe I could handle all of this on my own, and as friends, I should have come to you. And so that's when he says, I'm coming to you now. This war of the four cities that we have, right? This massive conflict that's taking place, something big is coming. Something big is going to happen. And when it does, I'm going to need all of you for that. Now, fortunately for Reed, he's kind of beat to the punch, because while the group is assembling and while they're traveling out to deal with these different versions of Reed, they literally look up into the sky and they see the entire Kree Armada descending on to the planet Earth with the intention of eradicating everybody. Now, here's the crazy thing about this. As interesting as all of this Kree Armada is going to be here for a little while, but a person is going to come who's going to save the day, and it's going to be amazing. So from this point going forward, we start jumping back and forth between the Future Foundation and the Fantastic Four stories. And let me tell you something, man, this is when it gets good, right? Do you guys remember Hickman's Avengers: The New Avengers, when you got to like time runs out and like everything was going nuts? That's what happens here. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.